If you grew up in the 90s or lived through the 90s, you are likely at least vaguely familiar with the name John Walsh. Kind of registering. Yeah, some of you know exactly who I'm talking about. If you don't know the name, you at least know his television program, America's Most Wanted. America's Most Wanted ran as a television program from 1988 until 2013. And in fact, actually, Walsh himself is currently working on a revival of that program alongside of his son, bringing us back into the realm of wanted fugitives. If you never got a chance to watch the show, pretty much every episode worked similarly all the time. Walsh would tell you the name of an alleged criminal, along with their alleged crimes. There would be dramatic reenactments of what those look like, because, we have to terrify you as well. But he would always use phrases like alleged or supposed when discussing these crimes because, we here in America, we believe in the notion of innocent until proven guilty. And then he would go on to tell you in great detail who they are, where they're from, what their crimes were, and what they may have eaten for dinner last night, if you knew that information. You know the show, but do you know the story behind America's Most Wanted? See, the story of America's Most Wanted actually gets started in 1981. At that time, John Walsh was working for Paradise Hotels in Hollywood, Florida. He just simply worked as a guy who made sure that hotels were run well, especially luxury hotels. But on July 27th, 1981, John's wife, Reevy, took their 6-year-old son, Adam, to the local Sears in order to pick up one thing and one thing only. And I think every parent in here knows that shopping trip, right? Once they had gotten to the store, Adam found himself drawn to a kiosk setup demonstrating the brand new game system Atari. Some of you just aged a few more years. But Adam was told by his mother to wait there at the game system to just hang out while she went to pick up the one thing that she was there for. She would be right back to come and get her son, and they would leave together. Once Reevy had gone and picked up, I think it was a lamp that she was there to get, she came back to that game kiosk looking for her son before they went to check out, but Adam was nowhere to be found. And worse yet, after grabbing some of the workers there at Sears, all of them had said they had not seen the young man. As you might imagine in that moment, the mom was probably more frustrated than she was anything else. She had told her 6-year-old, wait here, and now he was gone. By some coincidence, her mother-in-law happened to be in Sears at the same time. She bumped into her while trying to find somebody to page Adam, and the two of them searched the entire Sears, as up and down, top to bottom, left to right, everywhere they could, trying to find their son, all while workers kept paging him over the PA system, thinking that maybe the young man had simply wandered into another area of the store, or maybe he was playing a game that was not fun for his mom. But after 90 minutes of searching every inch of that Sears, they still had not found Adam. And Reevy did the most difficult thing she could. She called the local police department to report her son missing. 2 weeks later, at a drainage system about 120 miles from where Adam had gone missing, his remains were found. And based on the coroner's report, the young man had been murdered sometime shortly after he had gone missing. As you might imagine, this absolutely devastated the family, and the police tried everything they could to convince the Walshes that they were going to do whatever they could to try to make this situation right, to try to bring Adam's killer to justice. But John Walsh was filled with, I think, a rather understandable rage. And he felt that these police officers had not taken the missing child alert seriously to begin with, and they were not doing everything that they could. And so he was going to do whatever he could in that moment to try to do something himself. But the question you have to ask is, well, what do you do with that? What do you do with this pain that's inflicted on you by somebody else? What do you do when you are at the worst moment of your life? Well, for John, it started with trying to get more active politically, to advocate for missing or exploited children. He and Reeve worked very diligently, and in 1982, they passed the Missing Children's Act through Congress. In 1984, they assisted in bringing about the Missing Children's Assistance Act into fruition. But really, in 1983 is where everything began to shift for John Walsh. See, in 1983, a made-for-TV movie was made about the Adam Walsh situation. And at the end of that movie, they included pictures and descriptions of 55 missing children from around the world. But they also included a phone number that people could call with tips or information about said missing children. After its initial airing, 13 out of 55 were found and reunited with their families. After subsequent re-airings of the movie, even more missing children were found and reunited. And for John Walsh, something in his brain just kind of clicked, because he witnessed through this movie about his son and about this situation that they were able to activate the public at a level that the authorities had not been able to up to that point. And this led to the 1988 creation of America's Most Wanted, a show designed to inform and encourage the public to assist in finding and capturing some of the most dangerous criminals in the United States. Since then, America's Most Wanted helped to locate over 1,400 murderers, dangerous criminals, and wanted fugitives from around the nation, doing something good in the midst of something terrible. Walsh wanted to do something that was not in the plan for his life. I mean, who could possibly ever plan for that in their lives? But he wanted to take what was the worst moment of his life and try to find something good in the midst of it. And because of that, so many people have been helped. So many cases have been brought to justice. So many bad guys have been put away. A reality of life that none of us really likes to talk about or likes to face, but all of us know, is that each and every one of us are going to experience moments in our lives of incredible pain and heartache. I wish that was not true. But the sad reality is that each and every one of us have likely already walked through moments in our lives that have been so painful that we wonder, how do we keep putting one foot in front of the other? And if you haven't yet, I'm sorry, it's coming. The world that we live in is broken. And the truth about those moments that we experience this pain is that oftentimes they were not made by us. Those choices were not happening because of us. They were the results of someone else's choices. They may have been the results of an unforeseen circumstance that we didn't know about. But sometimes, and maybe worst of all, is they just happen. Randomly. There's no rhyme or reason behind them. They just take place. And some of these moments can be so impactful in our lives, so challenging for us, that we actually mark a complete shift in our personality because of it. We gauge our lives from who we were before this thing to who we are after. I've had to walk through some of these in my own life. Getting fired, dealing with financial hardships, and unfortunately having to bury far too many people who were dearly loved friends or family members who were a little too close to my age for comfort. Every single one of us has had to walk through those types of situations, but in the midst of those times in my life, I've learned something. And I want to share it with you today if I can. See, what I've learned is that when we face those moments of incredible pain that were not our fault or were the results of unforeseen circumstances or whatever they were, we're really left with one of two choices. See, we can choose to allow the pain of that moment to completely absorb everything else in our lives, to wallow in the midst of it, allowing it to break us down entirely to the point that we are a totally different person, that we are marked by the pain of that moment and oftentimes becoming bitter, angry, vengeful, depressed people. We can make that choice. Or we can choose to surrender that pain, to give it over to God, in the hope that somehow, some way, he'll be able to take that moment that none of us asked for, that none of us wanted, but for some reason we were dumped on with, and maybe he can use it for something good on down the road. And I think it's that mindset that Joseph himself carried with him. If you're not familiar with the story of Joseph, we're not talking about the Christmas Joseph. I know we're getting close to December, and I've told a couple people we're talking about Joseph this week, and they said, well, we don't know a lot about the guy. Not that Joseph. But if you're familiar with the story of Joseph, it takes place in Genesis chapter 37, but it goes on all the way through the Genesis 50. So if you're not familiar with the story of Joseph, I'm going to challenge you, like sometime today, maybe throughout the week, something like that, go and read Genesis 37 through 50, because there is a lot of stuff that goes on in those 13 chapters, and there is no way I can cover all of it in a single sermon, but I'm going to try. So get comfortable, I guess. But Joseph is a guy whose life is really marked by situations of pain. And those painful moments were given to him. They were not things that he wanted in and of himself. They were sort of just situations that were dumped on him, whether he wanted them or not. And yet it's those moments of those incredible pains that would ultimately set him on a path where he would get to see God do incredible things in the midst of that pain. Joseph was the son of a guy by the name of Jacob. And I'm not going to go into too much depth on Jacob because we're going to do a whole little study of him in the early part of 2026. Spoiler warning, I guess. But just know that Jacob had two wives, one named Leah, who he did not love, and one named Rachel, who he very much loved. I'm not going to tell you why that's the case. We're going to get there. Or, just read it yourself, I guess. But Leah was able to have kids left and right. I mean, like the woman was like in a constant state of pregnant, it seemed like. But Rachel, for a long time, seemed to be incapable of having children. No matter how much she wanted it, no matter how much they tried, Rachel could not get pregnant until Joseph. And so keep in mind that Joseph is the son given to Jacob by his preferred wife. So in Genesis chapter 37, verse 3, it clues us in on something that probably the entire family was already aware of. It says, now Israel, which is another name for Jacob. Again, we'll get there. Or again, read it yourself. I don't care. But now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. Real subtle, Dad. A few years ago, and for my own Father's Day card, I wrote in his card, like Genesis 37 verse 3 says this, and I said, thanks for being way less conspicuous about me being the favorite. So, conspicuous, that's the word. I only talk for a living. One day I'll learn how to do it. Anyway, but not only do Joseph's brothers have to put up with the fact that Dad is more than a little obvious about who the favorite is amongst them. Like everybody who has siblings, we have that moment in our head where we think, well, they just love my brother or my sister more, right? No. Okay, cool. Liars. Anyway, we all have those moments where we just assume that our sibling is the favorite. For Joseph's brothers, Dad was blunt with it. He was about as obvious as it could be. So not only do they have to deal with that fact, but Joseph has these dreams. And like a lot of us who have weird and unusual dreams in our lives, he felt the need to convey those dreams to other people. For instance, this week I had a dream where I was bowling with John Cena. I don't know why, it's just there. But in verse 5, Joseph tells his brothers about a dream. It says, now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So not only is he Dad's favorite, but by telling him about his dream, he is not winning over his brothers in any way, shape, or form. The dream goes that he and his brothers were binding together several sheaves of grain together. And after they had finished binding them together, Joseph's sheaf grew taller than the brothers. And the brothers' sheaves bowed to his sheaf. I'm no dream expert, but it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of hidden meaning there. And if that one wasn't enough, he had a secondary dream where the sun and the moon and 11 stars all bowed to Joseph. And it just so happens old Joe's got 11 brothers. Yeah, keep digging, Joseph. Eventually you're going to find your way out of that hole. His brothers hated him. And again, growing up with siblings, if you've done that, you know that there's a moment where you think, I hate my brother, I hate my sister. You don't, right? I'm responsible for 4 of my brother's baby teeth coming out early. But I would die for that kid. Right? The one and only fight I ever got into in elementary school was because somebody was picking on my little brother. That's my job, not yours. But Joseph's brothers full on hated him. And so when they get a chance to get Joseph alone in a field away from dad, they take their brother and they throw him into a pit. And their intention is that once they get to a good point, they're going to kill him. Their own brother. He seemed like such nice boys. But while they're having this discussion about what to do with Joseph, it just so happens that a group of Ishmaelites come by. And one of the brothers gets an idea. It's a brother by the name of Judah. He gets this whole notion of like, hey, if we kill our brother, it doesn't really gain us anything. We could sell him to the Ishmaelites. And where at least we're putting a little coin in our pocket, we've dealt with the Joseph problem. We'll just tell dad he died. So in verse 28, it says, the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. They take the super cool coat that dad gave Joseph, and they dip it in some animal blood, and they convince their father that a wild animal has torn his beloved son apart. But I want to kind of take a step back here and look at this all from Joseph's perspective. Right? The Bible tells us that Jacob himself was rather wealthy. So Joseph, most of his life, has probably lived a pretty comfortable lifestyle. And in a moment, in a decision made by his own flesh and blood, that's gone. Not only is his comfortable lifestyle gone, but now he is being ripped away from the family, from the father that he loves, and being sold off into a land he has never been to before, to go and be forced to work for the benefit of other people. How do you even begin to wrap your mind around all of this happening to you? And yet somehow Joseph doesn't do what I would have probably done in that situation and completely shut down. Instead, Joseph tries to make the best out of this situation. See, while he's in a guy by the name of Potiphar, who is the chief guard of all of Egypt, while he is in his house, Joseph works very diligently. He does everything that he can to the best of his ability. Whatever job he's given, he takes it and he runs with it. He makes sure that it is done, and it is done well. And over time, people begin to notice. And really, more importantly, one person begins to notice. Because in Genesis 39, verses 2 through 4, it says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. And so Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. Now I want to point this out to you. This whole situation got started because of a moment of incredible pain. Joseph very easily could have chosen, and I think understandably could have chosen, to just shut down. Right? His own brothers. And instead of wallowing in that pain, instead of allowing that to consume him and taint everything else in his life, instead Joseph chose to try to make the best out of a really bad situation. And it works out to the point where he is, again, overseer of the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard in Egypt, a very powerful, influential, and wealthy guy. He puts Joseph in charge of everything in his household. As far as forced labor goes, it could be worse. It could be a lot worse. Because in fact, actually, the first part of verse 6 says, so he being Potiphar, left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he, again being Potiphar, had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. Potiphar didn't just allow Joseph to be part of what is going on in his household. He was comfortable with Joseph. He trusted Joseph. Joseph is put in the best possible position that anybody in forced indentured servitude could be. And he has his master's trust, meaning that he doesn't really have to worry about anything. Just do your job and do it well. But Joseph does have a slight problem. And the end of verse 6 kind of gives us an idea of what that problem might be, because it says, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It's really nice to know that Joseph and I have at least one thing in common. But Joseph is handsome enough that he attracts the attention of a lady. And not just any lady. He attracts the attention of Potiphar's wife. And Joseph is handsome enough, good looking enough, built well enough, that this lady is ready to risk it all to spend a little time with Joseph. But Joseph refuses, right? And he even tells her, hey, your husband has put me in charge of everything. Why in the world would I want to violate that trust? And every time that she approaches him, he keeps refusing. Every time that she propositions him, he denies letting it happen. Until one day, as Joseph is in the household, he begins to realize, hey, none of the other household servants are here. In fact, nobody else is in the house except for her. And she is getting a lot more aggressive in her approach, because verse 12 actually says, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. Real subtle, lady. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Even in the midst of everything, with nobody looking, nobody around, nobody is going to know but him and her, Joseph is still a good man. And he runs away from her, but he made a mistake. She had hold of his robe. And so when Potiphar gets home later, this lovely woman convinces her husband that Joseph had tried to get after her. Again, Potiphar is a very important, powerful man in all of Egypt. And he had just found out, or at least had been told, by his wife that the most trusted servant in his household tried to take advantage of her. And so as a husband, he does what I think is a very rational and reasonable thing. He has Joseph thrown in prison. And it's not like Joseph is just in prison for a little while. It's not like it's a 10-day hold or anything like that. Joseph is in prison for years. But what did Joseph do wrong? Once again, Joseph's entire life is completely destroyed by the choice of somebody else. Once more in his life, someone else has made a decision that has completely obliterated the life that he had. And now, it's not that he's sold into slavery, it's that he is in prison in Egypt, which is not a society that's exactly known for having top-notch prison systems. How do you wrap your brain around this? Twice His life has been completely destroyed. And none of it because he did anything wrong. I mean, if it's me, I give up, right? But that's not what Joseph does. See, because while he's in prison, there's a couple other guys who wind up in there, and they share a little prison time with Joseph. And these guys used to be pretty important. They're not important anymore, but they used to be really important. One of them is the former cupbearer of Pharaoh, the head honcho of all of Egypt. Cupbearer is a very trusted position. It's your job to make sure that nobody else touches that cup of Pharaoh's but him and you, and that's it. That way, nobody can try to poison him by putting something in his wine. Nothing bad can happen to him there. Somehow or other, the cupbearer fell out of favor with Pharaoh. We don't really know. We're not given any sort of information on that. It may have been as simple as he set the cup down, went into the other room for like 30 seconds, came back, and Pharaoh just happened to catch him not touching the cup. But also there is the baker of Pharaoh. But you got to be really important to have your own baker, right? How cool would that be? Fresh donuts whenever you want. Oh my gosh. That's the dream right there, isn't it? And somehow or other, the baker has fallen out of favor with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh, being a totally rational man, has thrown both these guys, who maybe have just given him minor inconvenience, into prison, like he would, right? But one night, these guys both of them have a dream, and we kind of know that Joseph already knows a little something about dreams, right? So when he hears the cupbearer say, "I had a dream last night," Joseph's like, "Hey, tell me about it. Maybe I can tell you about what it means." The baker says, "Well, I also had a dream." And he's like, "Okay, cool. Well, tell me about that one too, and I'll tell you both." And for one of them, it's great news. For the other one, See, the cupbearer's dream ultimately means that he's about to not only be released from prison, but to be completely reinstated to his former position. Everything that he had had in his life is about to be returned to him. That's great. For the baker, I hope you're not overly attached to your head. Because if you are, you're about to not be. But he tells the cupbearer, before everything takes place, he tells the cupbearer, when you're back with Pharaoh, do me a favor. Tell him about me. Right? At this point, Joseph's probably been in prison for years. For something he did not do. Because of a lie. And he's just asking this guy, you're about to have the ear of the most powerful man in, at this point, the world. Could you tell him about me? And the cupbearer does. Eventually. He actually remembers Joseph about 2 years later. What a pal, right? And he only remembers Joseph because Pharaoh himself has a dream that's kind of weird, and he's looking for the explanation of it, and the cupbearer happens to think, oh yeah, I know a guy. And so suddenly Joseph finds himself released from prison and placed right in front of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh can tell him about this weird dream about these 7 ugly, sickly, thin cows who eat these 7 gorgeous, I guess, fat, plump cows. And then there's 7 sickly, puny-looking ears of grain that eat 7 fat, good-looking ears of grain. I've never found an ear of grain overly attractive myself, but whatever. So Pharaoh lays out this dream before Joseph, and Joseph tells him, well, what that means is that Egypt's about to have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of less than. In fact, it actually says in Genesis chapter 45, verses 4 through, oh, sorry, no, not that one. Genesis 41, 29 and 30, it says, there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of all of Egypt. But after that, there will arise 7 years of famine, and this is the part that we have to look at, and all of the plenty will be forgotten. The famine will consume the land. They're about to experience 7 great years, right? I'm the son of a farmer. I know when my dad's having a good year. As a kid at Christmas time, I really knew when Dad was having a good year, right? I also know when Dad's not having a great year, right? And in fact, what Joseph is telling him is that these 7 years are going to be amazing. The next 7, though, are going to be so bad, you're going to forget all about those 7. And so Joseph actually, I don't know if he mentions it as an aside or what he does, but he just sort of mentions to Pharaoh, so what I would do if I were you, Pharaoh, what a fun thing to think, right? is I would, over the next 7 years, take a little bit of food from everybody and just kind of store it. And that way, whenever the 7 bad years hit, hey, we've got some reserves here. Maybe we collect enough, we can even sell it to some other nations, make a little coin, put it all in our pocket. Everybody likes to make a profit, don't they? And Pharaoh is so impressed by Joseph, so impressed by this dream interpretation, so impressed by this moment, that when he's thinking about, hey, who do I get to run this whole thing? He says, hey, you know that guy who spent the last several years in prison? Let's have him do it. Not only does he make Joseph, released and give him a really important job to do, he actually elevates Joseph to the position of second in all of Egypt. The vice pharaoh, if you will. Is that a title? Yeah, that's what we're going with. Dude goes from prison to the palace in a day. That's a good day, right? Probably wouldn't have happened if he'd wallowed in that pain in the first place. Probably wouldn't have happened if Joseph had been so upset about having lost everything that when the cupbearer said, hey guys, I had this weird dream last night, Joseph didn't say a word. That'd have been easy for him to do. But as the famine hits, if you're counting with us, 7 years later, it hits hard. And it hits so hard it doesn't just affect Egypt. It actually affects all of the nations around Egypt, including where Joseph's brothers live. But his brothers have heard about this dude down in Egypt who, for some reason or other, has chosen for the last 7 years to save as much food as he possibly can. And that now they're willing to sell some of that food to other people if they come and visit it. And so Joseph's brothers find themselves in front of the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, who they have to bow to out of respect. And he just so happens to be their brother. Joseph has a little fun with this at first, right? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? They don't recognize Joseph. It's been probably a few decades at this point in time. So a lot of time has passed between when they sold him off and to where they're standing right now in front of him. They don't recognize him. And eventually Joseph, though, he reveals himself to him. And at first his brothers are really scared, right? You're telling me that you're the brother that we sold into slavery and now you're the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. We're dead. But Joseph has a really unique perspective. One that I think has taken him years to cultivate. And we read that perspective in Genesis chapter 45, verses 4 through 8. It says, so Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in this land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his houses, and ruler over the land of Egypt. See, Joseph understood that God used the pain of his brothers selling him into slavery. He used the pain that his brothers caused for good. Again, I am convinced that Joseph is a wise dude, don't get me wrong. But I am convinced that as he's sitting in the pit waiting for his brothers to make a decision whether to kill him or slavery, I don't think he ever had the thought of like, boy, I think God's going to use something good out of all this. When he's sitting in a jail cell for something that he didn't do, I don't think he gets the thought, boy, God's going to do something amazing here. Right? Because that's never what we're thinking in those moments. So it took him years to get to the point where he makes this realization. It took decades of Joseph walking through the pain of his brothers selling him off, betraying him at a level that is unheard of, finding some way through the midst of that pain to try to rebuild a life and build a pretty good one, all things considered, only to have that life destroyed because some woman told a lie. And walking through years of pain after that, forced to endure the harshest prison that he could possibly consider. But understand this, and this is what I think Joseph realized. See, had his brothers not have sold him off, had he not have had to endure that pain, had he not have been in prison, Joseph never would have been in the position that he was in right now. A position that not only saved his life, not only saved the lives of the Egyptian nation, but somehow was able to save his own family too. In spite of every horrible thing that Joseph had to endure, he was able to surrender his pain to God, trusting that God could make something good out of it. And God came through for him. I don't for a second want you to think that I am trying to minimize the pain that you have walked through or that you are currently walking through. Please, please, please do not think that that is what I'm trying to do. And in fact, I am so very sorry that you have had to walk through that pain or that you are currently having to walk through that pain. I wish you didn't, because I wish I didn't have to. But again, the reality of life is that whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, every single one of us has or will walk through moments of incredible pain. And when we find ourselves in those moments of incredible pain, that we are left with a question, just one. And that question is very simply, what am I going to do with this pain? Right? Every single one of us asks ourselves that question. What am I going to do with this pain? Am I going to allow this pain to completely and totally consume who I am, tainting everything else in my life, potentially ruining every relationship that I have, destroying every element of who I once was, and replacing it with a bitter, angry, self-destructive person? Or am I going to try to find some way? And I wish I could give you a blueprint on how to do this, but I haven't figured it out myself yet. Am I going to try to find some way to surrender this pain? To hand it over to God and trust that somehow, some way he can do something with this. I wish I could tell you it was easy. Oh, I wish I could tell you that was easy. But the reality is that sometimes this takes time. This takes effort. This takes energy. This takes actual thought. This takes planning in some cases for us to be able to let go of pain. Pain is like a weight, right? Yes? When we walk through those moments of incredible pain, we carry that pain with us. But understand that through surrender, what we are choosing to do is release the burden of that weight. That's not easy, right? There are parts of me that when I have walked through some of the most painful times in my life, I have been holding on to that weight with white knuckles, refusing to even consider putting it down for a moment, let alone dropping it to somebody else. And yet if we are able to find some way to surrender that pain, to hand it over to God, I know that God can take that pain, take that horrible, terrible thing that has completely destroyed your life, and somehow Turn it into something good. I don't think it's going to be instantaneous, though, because it wasn't for Joseph. It took decades for him to be able to have the perspective to finally say, oh, this is why, or this is what God is doing, or this is how God has used my pain. Decades. And I'm going to be honest with you. There is a chance you may not actually be alive to see the good that comes out of it. You won't get to see it this side of heaven. But I know that God is somehow able to take the worst moments of our lives and still turn them into something good. We just have to surrender that pain to him. So let me ask you this. Can you trust him to let go of your pain? To surrender it over to him? Can you trust him enough to do that? Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 and 25 say, "Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it.'"